Why so? Because I'll just go over that when we get started with the class. Okay, why are we doing? What is the purpose of just doing it in the vicinity of the equilibria? And that goes back to why we even looked at define something called as equilibrium points themselves. Okay, we'll discuss that now. Okay, I think it is 5 minutes past 10. So let us get started. So a couple of announcements. I have not yet corrected your exam papers. Hopefully, I will be done with the correction maybe on Thursday. Let us see. I have a meeting, an important meeting to attend tomorrow. But assuming that I'm able to devote time, then I'll try to finish the correction by next in another couple of days. So that's one announcement. And then I hope all of you were able to attend the meeting that was convened by Yogesh and Soumya Kanti on Saturday. Even if you are not able to attend, I hope you were able to watch the videos. So this software is very useful. And in fact, the next assignment would have a couple of problems associated with numerical solution to these nonlinear differential equations, that multi-body systems obey. That's one thing for which you would have to apply Rangekutta RK4 technique to solve them. So you have to write a small code in MATLAB to solve those equations. And a couple of problems would be drawn from using this particular software. So we would recommend some mechanism with some being experienced by that mechanism, and we would ask you to obtain the motion of that mechanism under the influence of those forces. Okay, so that would be the next homework 6, and that will be sent out soon. And homework 5, a few of you requested that the deadline be extended, so it will be due this Friday. So I will send out that link for uploading the homework Friday 9 a.m. Okay, so I will send out the link for uploading the homework soon. Okay, so these are the announcements that I have. So with that, let me share the screen. I'm sorry I turned up late today. I couldn't get started from home early enough. So if some of you are waiting to ask me questions, I'm really sorry that I couldn't show up on time. If necessary, you can email me your questions, or if you can stay back, we can discuss them after the class. Just a moment. Dinesh Kumar Agarwal has a question.
Sir, we have requested them. They have not approved our request for download the software actually. Still pending, sir.
Still pending, is it? Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Aha, okay. Then maybe we will do one thing. I will decouple this homework 6 from that exercise. Maybe I'll
because
once you are
Friday I
done.
requested them, but they not accepted the request, and we cannot download the software.
What about the others? Do anybody else have you guys tried to download it, and have you succeeded? Can
Sir,
anybody else?
Not yet.
they are telling that they will send a mail, but actually we have to by ourselves log in and download the software. Means they are not sending the mail.
Okay. So others also have similar experience. Krishna,
Actually, they won't
Rajpal,
send a
Abhishek, Subhadip.
so they won't send a confirmation mail. You have to go after 2 or 3 days to their website and download it yourself.
So you are able to do that.
Yes, sir. So and there are some problems with installations, but eventually I figured it out.
Yes, sir. There are problems with installation.
Installation, is it?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, this is Vivek. Sir, I
Vivek.
got a confirmation mail from them. It was in the junk email box. So just a heads
Maybe
up
that's
that people may have to look into that also.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
It will take us to login page, sir.
Okay. So then many of you have received confirmation mails. Sometimes it has gone to the junk folder. So kindly, those of you who have not received it, kindly look that up. And in view of these installation difficulties and other things, maybe I will decouple homework 6 from solving problems associated with this software. I'll give the problem as part of some other homework. I mean, I need not give this problems, but I want you guys to learn this software because it would be useful for you, not only in your project but also later on when you approach an employer. So it's for that purpose that I'm getting you to practice using this software. It's a useful, popular software. Okay, so with that, let us get started with today's lecture. The title of today's lecture is a solution of the state equation. Okay, so let us briefly recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. So we saw that although up to this point, all of the modeling effort that we had put was in modeling multi-rigid body systems interconnected by means of certain kinds of joints. That same formalism, the Lagrangian formalism, is much more roomy than just being able to obtain the dynamic equations for a multi-rigid body system. It can, without too much more effort, also encompass other important elements that mechanical engineers deal with in their day-to-day design, namely springs and dampers. So if you have an ability to include the effects of springs, dampers into your multi-body dynamics, then you're pretty much covered all the subsystems that would go into a mechanical system, and you have the tools at your disposal to come up with a dynamic model for that general mechanical system. Okay, so we started out by seeing how we can write down the potential energy for the spring as half kx square, and then apply Euler-Lagrange equation for this. And then we saw how we could define what is known as a Rayleigh dissipation function R, and use the Rayleigh dissipation function to obtain the generalized force due to dissipative forces, such as those due to dampers or due to air drag and so on and so forth. Okay, so what we discovered by means of a numerical example, we demonstrated that even when these kinds of elements are included, the structure of that equation does not change. We had obtained that beautiful equation of the kind m times q double dot plus b times q dot plus c times q is equal to tau. As this was a structure that we obtained for mass spring damper system, but this was analogous to the equation that we obtained for the rigid body dynamics. C q comma q dot times q dot plus g of q is equal to tau. If you notice these two equations, but for the fact that the mass matrix is dependent on the generalized coordinates, there is a very close resemblance. Okay, in many ways, a system comprising only springs and dampers and masses is far more simple in structure compared to the more general one, namely of a multi-rigid body system, right? So if I can, so this equation therefore is more general than that equation, because this permits the mass matrix and the coefficient of q dot etc. to be functions of q, whereas here these are constant matrices. Okay, so therefore the same equation can accommodate other elements as well, and we therefore need not search for a different approach to solving problems involving masses, involving springs and dampers and so on. All of them will have this general form. It's just that the number of degrees of freedom may be higher if the number of elements is more. That's it. And as we also saw, this form is not particularly suited for numerical solution, and therefore we cast it in the so-called state space form. Okay, so x dot is equal to f of x comma u. Okay, we called x as a state vector. We called u as the input vector. So this is the vector comprising all the joint torques that would be multi-body system. Okay, then of immediate importance to us was to find a way to solve this forward dynamics problem, namely one of obtaining x of t, capital X of t, given u of t. Okay, and we noted that given the generally nonlinear nature of this differential equation, it is not possible for us to obtain the solution in closed form. Okay, I cannot tell you how time by simply writing down an equation. q is equal to e to the power at or some such thing. Okay, so therefore we had to resort to numerical techniques, and we looked at Runge-Kutta as one very promising technique for solving equations, differential equations that have this particular structure. Okay, but all said, numerical solutions are sort of leave us dissatisfied. It doesn't completely whet our appetite. Why is that so? That's because numerical solutions only tell us on an incremental basis, how the solution is progressing. Okay, if I know what the solution is at this instant of time, I can use the numerical technique to only know what it would be at the next instant of time. I don't know how it will change 10 instants of time from now. Okay, so that is one major concern with numerical solutions. The second concern is, if I give different inputs or different initial conditions, for every one of them I need to separately solve these equations. Okay, every one of them pass through this Runge-Kutta machinery and incrementally go from step to step to step and obtain the overall solution. So this bird's eye view, this overview of how the solutions are evolving with time, is not available to me if I adopt the numerical approach. Okay, so I crave some bird's eye view, some big picture of how the solutions evolve with time. Okay, if I apply a certain input u, are the solutions going to infinity? Are they oscillating about a certain point? Are they going to zero? These are some general questions that I would like answers to. Of course, if I specify the initial conditions, specify the input, Runge-Kutta gives me the answer eventually, but it's only in a step-by-step manner. And that bird's eye view that I was talking of, for all future time, how does the solution evolve? That information is not made available to me by the numerical technique. Okay, so that is why we started to look for, ask ourselves the second question. All right, this equation is hopelessly complicated as far as obtaining a closed form solution is concerned. I love to see closed form solutions because that tell me, that give me the big picture of how the solutions are evolving with time, no matter what time it is that I'm looking for. But I know how to accept partial defeat in that this is too complicated for me to aspire for obtaining the closed form solution of this equation. So, thing that I do, let me be a little bit more modest, reduce my ambitions somewhat, and ask myself, are there at least a few scenarios, are there at least a few situations in which a closed form solution can be obtained for this kind of a system? Okay, for which we found one answer. Okay, the first and a trivial answer is, there are a set of states. So the state vector, this equation tells how the state vector evolves as function of time. X dot is equal to f of x comma u. It turned out that there are a certain set of states which do not evolve at all with time. In other words, you leave your system in those states with those velocities and with those positions, they will stay there for all future time. And therefore, that is one very trivial scenario. That's one trivial situation in which I know how the states evolve with time. I know the closed form solution to this differential equation. So I can therefore obtain the closed form solution for one very special case, and that's when f of x comma 0 is equal to 0. Of course, if I apply u again, I end up with a nonlinear differential equation, and for that, again, I'll not be able to obtain a closed form solution. So it is to whet my appetite for a closed form solution that I am attempting to look at equilibria, and I'm attempting to linearize the differential equation about the equilibria, and so on and so forth. So this answers hopefully Subhadip's question as to why we are doing this. Okay, so we saw that those states x which satisfy this equation, we called them x naught, and we called those states as equilibrium points. So there was a minor victory of sorts in our attempt to take this problem. Okay, it's a very small victory because these states don't evolve at all with time. They are just, you leave them in those particular positions. For example, you leave a pendulum hanging down vertically, it will not change its position. If there is no input, it will not change its position. It's a very boring solution in many ways, right? It's something that you can easily anticipate. But then we asked ourselves a slightly more challenging question. All right, we have had one small victory. Are there other small victories possible, which again may not take down the full problem, but yet do not leave us high and dry, only to have to deal with Runge-Kutta to understand how X changes with time. Okay, it was with that, it was in that spirit that we started to look at states that are very close to these equilibrium points. Okay, so can we at least for those states which are close to equilibrium points, can we obtain the closed form solution to this differential equation? Okay, that was what led us to linearize this differential equation. So what we did was we defined the actual state vector X as, we wrote it down as the equilibrium vector x0 plus some small deviation from that equilibrium point, and we noticed that deviation dynamics, the dynamics of x dot was of this kind. X dot is equal to delta f by delta x evaluated at x0, capital X evaluated at x0 times x plus f by delta u evaluated at u equal to 0 times u. Okay, these symbols, as I said, look deceptively simple, and that's the genius again of packaging. What this actually represents is an n by n matrix. Okay, if this is a vector of dimension n by 1, capital N by 1, okay, then this is an n by n matrix. Okay, and we saw what the elements of that matrix are. Delta f by delta x at x0 by definition is delta f1 by delta x1, delta f1 by delta xn, etc., etc., delta fn by delta x1, delta fn by delta xn, all evaluated at x is equal to x0. Okay, or in other words, x0 is equal to x1 naught, x2 naught, x3 naught, etc., etc., that vector of equilibrium points. Similar definition also holds for the other term here. Okay, so the reason we try to linearize was in our attempt to see whether at least in the vicinity of this equilibria, wherein we can ignore the nonlinear terms, because those nonlinear terms have x square and u square and so on, and they will be very small in magnitude if our deviation from our equilibrium point is very small. Okay, therefore at least in that limit can we obtain the closed form expression for this differential equation. X dot is equal to f of x comma u. That is our quest. Okay, we want the closed form expression because it's the most satisfying result. Okay, if you look back at your 12th standard or 11th standard calculus, you weren't taught Runge-Kutta technique to solve differential equations in your 12th standard calculus, right? You were taught how to solve those differential equations directly. Why was that so? Because humanity in general values these closed form expressions, because I tell you how the solution evolves with time for all times. Okay, and regardless of the initial condition, that flexibility and power is lacking in the numerical technique. Okay, it is very it's like tying a tight cloth to your eyes and allowing you to peek through only a tiny gap in that cloth. That's the way. That's the best analogy that I can think of for numerical solutions. They don't tell you anything about what happens to a different set of initial conditions, or what happens at or different kind of inputs, or for all time t. Okay, that is why we seek closed form solutions to this to these problems. Okay, so we will continue our quest today. What we did in the previous lecture was took examples. I think one of a nonlinear spring and other of a pendulum, to firstly show what the equilibrium points are systems, and secondly to linearize the dynamics. In case of the nonlinear spring, we ended up linearizing the dynamics. In case of the pendulum, however, we did not do it. So to develop comfort with this machinery, okay, this is a new language to many of you. So to develop comfort with this, the state space based representation of a system is something that you have not come across, I assume, too many times in the past. So let me obtain the linearized dynamics of a pendulum. Okay. So here is our familiar pendulum. there's a point mass, and this angle is theta, deviation from my equilibrium point. Okay, so the length is L, and we know that the equation will be theta double dot plus G by L sine theta is equal to 0. Okay, so we cast it in the state space form. We define x1 as theta and x2 as x1 dot, which is theta dot, and therefore I would get the equation to be x2 dot, which is theta double dot, plus G by L sine x1 is equal to 0. Okay, I will also add a torque tau here just to have a certain input as well acting on my system. Okay, so I will have two equations, x1 dot is equal to x2, x2 dot is equal to tau minus G by L sine x1. Okay, so my state vector is x1, x2, and that state vector dot will therefore be equal to this function x2 and tau minus G by L sine x1. This is my function f of x comma u. Okay, so I need to linearize this. So to linearize it, what do? I need to linearize it about the equilibrium points. So what are the equilibrium points? The steps to determine the equilibrium points are to first set the u to be equal to 0, or in other words, tau is equal to 0, in which case I would have x1 dot, x2 dot to be equal to x2 and minus G by L sine x1. Okay, and this f of x comma 0 equal to 0, and we know x1 is equal to n pi and x2 is equal to 0. Okay, where n could assume integer values 0, plus minus 1, plus minus 2, etc., etc. Okay, so let us linearize the dynamics about one of the equilibrium points. So one equilibrium point, for example, is the displacement is 0 and the velocity is also 0. So this is one equilibrium point. There are many, there are infinitely many equilibrium points, okay, for this particular system. So how do we do it? Let us do this very algorithmically, okay? Let us not take shortcuts and so on. Just blindly apply the process that we have outlined in the previous lecture. So I need to compute this Jacobian, okay, which is delta f1 by delta x1, delta f1 by delta x2, delta f2 by delta x1, delta f2 by delta x2, and evaluate this Jacobian at x1 naught, at x naught, or in other words, at x1 naught equal to 0 and x2 naught also equal to 0. Okay, so if I do that, what is f1? If I look at this equation here, this is f1, and this here is f2, right? So partial of f1 with respect to x1, if you look at this, is 0, because f1 is just equal to x2. So its partial with respect to x1 is 0. Partial of f1 with respect to x2 is 1. Okay, and partial of f2 is minus G by L sine x1. Partial derivative of that with respect to x1 is therefore going to be equal to minus G by L cos x1. Okay, and then partial of f2 with respect to x2 is going to be 0, because that function does not depend on x2. Okay, so this is the term. So if I have x dot, that's going to be equal to this term x, and this term is evaluated at 0, 0. Okay, plus I have only one input here, so partial of f1 with respect to u and partial of f2 with respect to u evaluated at u equal to 0. That will be the second matrix. It's going to be just a column vector in this particular case, because I have only one input, namely the torque tau. Okay, so if I evaluate the first matrix at x1 equal to 0, I get this to be simply 1 minus G by L 0. Okay, times x plus partial of f1 with respect to u is 0, because f1 is equal to x2. It is not dependent on u, so that is 0 there. And partial of f2 with respect to u. So if in computing this, we are considering the case when f2, the function, is also dependent on u. Okay, it's not the it's not f of x comma 0 that we are considering when we are taking this partial derivative, in which case this will simply end up becoming equal to 0. It will be the original functional relationship. And if you go back to the original functional relationship, we see that f2 is tau minus g by L sin x1. So the partial of f2 with respect to tau is simply equal to 1. Okay, so therefore this will be equal to 1 times tau. Okay, so x dot is equal to this equation. This is often as the A matrix and this is called as the B matrix. Okay, so x dot is equal to Ax plus Bu would be the approximate dynamics of our original nonlinear system about this equilibrium point, namely 0, 0. Any questions about this? Okay, so although my original differential equation that the pendulum obeys is something that I cannot solve in closed form, in fact it involves elliptic integrals and so on. So even when I don't have any forcing, no torque acting on the right hand side, it is not possible to solve this in closed form. Okay, but in the vicinity of theta equal to 0, I can solve it. And all of you have solved this problem even during your undergrad or probably also during your 11th standard and 12th standard. You know that the motion is a simple harmonic motion, and that simple harmonic motion appears this way when you cast it in the state space form. Okay, we will look at that sometime later. We will get back that familiar sinusoidal response of theta as function of time, if time permits, at some later point. Okay, now suppose I have to do this at a different equilibrium point. You know, all these, if n is 0, n is 2, n is 4, and so on, all these are equivalent equilibrium points, right? 0, 2 pi, 4 pi, they all point to this pendulum pointed down. Okay, however, pi, 3 pi, 5 pi, and all those values of theta correspond to the pendulum being vertical, okay, being in its inverted configuration. So what is the linearized dynamics about that equilibrium point where the pendulum is pointed up? Okay, let us do that. I don't need to go through the whole machinery once again. I just need to evaluate this Jacobian at a new equilibrium point. Instead of x10 being equal to 0, I have to set that equal to pi. Okay, so I shall just do that. So I know what that form of that equation is, and therefore I would have x dot is equal to 0, 1 minus g by L cos x1 evaluated at x1 equal to pi, and that becomes just g by L plus g by L. Okay, 0 times x plus the other term remains exactly as before, 0, 1 times tau. So this is the linearized dynamics of my original nonlinear differential equation about the equilibrium point. Now again, I want to remind you that the reason I'm explaining this linearized dynamics is because I am on this quest to obtain the closed form solution to this differential equation. Okay, something that has this slightly simpler appearance compared to the original one, which had a general nonlinear function on the right hand side of the states and the input. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so now let us embark on our quest formally. Let us try to solve this differential equation. Okay, x dot is equal to Ax plus Bu. Okay, how do we solve this differential equation? Of course, if you have this equation, you need to have a set of states. The initial condition has to be specified, and I shall call that as x naught. Okay, remember that this is an n by 1 vector. A is an n by n vector, and B, the size of B depends on the number of inputs. So if I have m joint torques, so if U is a m by 1 vector, then B is a n by m vector. Okay, in our particular case, we have only had, in the case of the pendulum, we had only one joint torque. Therefore, U was a scalar, and therefore B was just a n by 1, 2 by 1 vector. That's it, was a column vector. Okay, how do we solve this differential equation? Now, if you stare at it for a little while, you may not be able to solve it because we are talking about vectors here. It's not a scalar equation, right? But suppose we were asked to solve the scalar equation and not the vector equation. So let us say I had an equation of the kind x dot is equal ax plus small bu. Okay. Yeah. The reason I'm trying to look at the scalar equation is because when I stare at it for a few minutes, it is not clear to me how to proceed. How am I going to solve this equation is not clear to me at the very outset. Okay, which is why I am progressively becoming less and less ambitious in my attempt to obtain this closed form solution. Okay, let me first try to see if I can do it for a scalar x. So this is 1 by 1 and this is a scalar. Also all are scalars. Okay, even this doesn't appear very straightforward. Okay, so what I shall do then is make the problem even more simple. Okay, let me set u equal to 0 as before. Okay, in such a case, this kind of a system is called as an autonomous system, something which has no external forcing. Okay, then I will have x dot is equal to ax as my scalar differential equation with an initial condition x of 0 is equal to x naught. Can I solve this at least with the knowledge, with the techniques that my teachers have imparted to me during my 11th standard and 12th standard and so on? Of course you can, right? So dx by dt is equal to ax. Therefore, dx by x is equal to a dt. So when I integrate this, I get the solution to be x is equal to e to the power at times x naught. You can verify that. The limits of this integral are 0 to t. Okay, so if you want me to fill in the intermediate steps, dx by x integral is ln of x. Okay, and between time t equal to 0 and t equal to some time t, so I will get ln of x of t minus ln of x of 0, which is x naught, is equal to at. Okay, from which I just get this particular expression. Okay, so great. That gives me a little bit of confidence after having suffered a series of defeats and after my ego has taken a series of beatings. I have been humbled quite a few times in my attempt to obtain a closed form solution. At last, there is a small silver lining to that effort. I'm able to obtain it for the most simple case. Okay, a autonomous system, a scalar autonomous differential equation, as modest and as simple as it can get. But yet, this is a good starting point. Okay, what I have is a clue for how I can proceed. Okay, for the more general case. So let me not immediately jump to solve the problem which has forcing. Let me still stick to this world of autonomous systems. Suppose instead of this being a scalar equation, suppose I had a vector equation now. Slightly more ambitious target. X dot is equal to ax, where a is a matrix. So this is now a n by 1 vector. This is a n by n matrix, and that's also n by 1 vector. Okay, can I now solve this? Okay, x of 0 is equal to x naught. Can I now solve this equation? Drawing inspiration from that first equation. Well, there's one way to do it. Okay, can the form of the solution be the same? So can x of t, even in this case, be of the kind e to the power capital AT times x naught? Well, that may be possible, but then this is an extremely strange term that we have introduced here. What on earth is e to the power capital AT? See, I can imagine e square. I can imagine e cube. I can imagine square root of e or e to the power 0.5. I can imagine e to the power t. So e to the power any scalar quantity is something that I can easily imagine because I'm at some level multiplying e that many times. Okay, e square is e times e and so on. So I can easily picture what is happening in this particular case. E to the power at is I'm multiplying e at number of times. Okay, so this therefore is intuitively an easy thing for me to digest, to understand. But what on earth is e raised to the power a matrix, right? Because t is a scalar, a is a matrix, a n by n matrix. What on earth is e raised to the power a matrix? It's such an abstract thing, right? Contemplation of such questions can give us easily big headaches. So instead of trying to contemplate and try to draw parallels between e square, the way we can easily imagine e square as e times e, if you try to attempt to imagine e to the power a matrix, you are not going to go anywhere. Instead, let us just adopt a definition of e to the power at in terms of its power series. Okay, what is e to the power at? E to the power at is 1 plus at plus a square t square by 2 factorial plus so on and so forth. This is a definition also. This is a definition of e to the power at. So suppose instead of bothering to imagine what e to the power a matrix times time is, let me simply define e to the power capital At as just an identity matrix plus that matrix A times t plus that matrix A square times t square by 2 factorial plus and so on and so forth. Then I have a way to at least imagine this particular form of solution. Okay, these are all very concrete things. If A is a n by n matrix, I know what A times t will be. It will be another n by n matrix. I will be an n by n identity matrix. These are all n by n matrices. A square will be another n by n matrix. I just need to compute it. That's all. Okay, so I need to do it enough number of times to get the expression for e to the power at. So at least I now have a way. I guessed this as a possible solution, but then I didn't understand what that meant. Okay, I just borrowed from my scalar solution some inspiration and guessed this to be the form of solution, then pondered about what this could even mean. And then we have now found a way to infuse meaning into this particular term, e to the power at. Okay, it is not something abstract that can give us headaches. It is just this, series. It's some polynomial in A and t and the time t. Any questions so far? Okay, so now we have guessed this, but we have to establish that this is actually a solution, right? So what are we trying to do when we are trying to establish that it is a solution? We have to compute x dot, assuming that it is of this particular form, okay, and then show that x dot is actually equal to a times x. So if we show that, then we can confidently claim that this is a solution to our differential equation. At time t equal to 0, you see that this term e to the power a times 0 will simply be equal to the identity matrix, and x of t will be equal to x naught. So the initial condition is satisfied by this particular form of solution. All we need to demonstrate next is that this differential equation is also satisfied by this particular form of the solution. Okay, that's what we will do next to confirm that at least for the autonomous system we are able to solve this differential equation. We were able to obtain a closed form expression for this differential equation solution. Okay, so how do we do it? Quite straightforward. If x of t is e to the power at x naught, then x dot of t is therefore equal to d by dt of e to the power at times x naught plus e to the power at times d by dt of x naught. Okay, what is d by dt of x naught? X naught is an initial condition vector, right? It's a constant vector, so this does not change with time. So this term goes to 0 therefore. Okay, so what I'll be left with is d by dt of e to the power at times x naught. Okay, if e to the power at is given by this expansion, I'll just plug that expansion in here, and I would get x dot to be equal to d by dt of I plus at plus a square t square by 2 factorial, etc., times x naught. Okay, which is, what is it? So the first term is 0, the second term is a, the third term is a square times 2 times t by 2 factorial. The fourth term will be a cube times 3 times t square by 3 factorial, etc., and you start to see a pattern here, right? This is nothing, this whole thing multiplies x naught. Okay, this is nothing but 0 plus a square t by 1 factorial, because this 2 cancels one of the 2's at the bottom, plus a cube t square by 2 factorial, etc., So the general term is a power k t power k minus 1 by k minus 1 factorial, and this goes on to infinity. times x naught. Okay, so I remove a out of this equation and I get a times I plus at plus a square t square by 2 factorial plus etc times x naught. Now, do you recognize this here? This is nothing but e to the power at, right? So this is nothing but a times e to the power at x naught. Okay, so this e to the power at x naught is our assumed form of the solution x of t, right? So this will this will be nothing but a times x of t. So we assumed a certain form for a solution. We noticed that it satisfies our initial conditions without too much trouble. And we also now notice that it satisfies our differential equation. So x dot actually will be equal to a times x if x of t has this particular form. Okay, so what does this indicate? This indicates that we have come to the end of our journey, in trying to obtain the closed form solution to this particular problem. Any questions so far? There is still, this problem is far from resolved. Of course, now I have a weight how the solution evolves with time, because I have this time variable explicitly made available to me. So I can plug in that particular instant of time and compute this sum to understand what the value of that, the x of t would be at that instant of time. Okay, unlike with the Runge-Kutta technique, where I know only what it would be for the next step. I can now plug in any time t and get the answer, and I can plug in any initial condition x naught and multiply that x naught with this e to the power at matrix, and then get the the x of t for that particular x naught. So this therefore addresses two of the lacunae associated with Runge-Kutta based technique. So I can, for any initial condition and at any instant of time t, I can directly get the solution by simply looking at this expression. So partial victory. Now our victory has become slightly bigger. I mean, we were just able to celebrate, only when we had the states not evolving at all with time, and that was the equilibrium state. But now we are allowing for the state to change with time, and still we are able to obtain how it changes as long as these states are in the vicinity of the equilibrium points. Okay, and also as long as we do not have forcing. So although it's a victory, it's still a very modest one. So let us see if we can expand upon it somewhat. Okay, can we now, with some trepidation, introduce that forcing as well, and hope to solve this differential equation also. Okay, if we are able to solve this differential equation, then it's a real victory in that if I have any input u, as long as the states are in the neighborhood of my equilibrium point, I can obtain how those states evolve as function of time. Okay, this is what we will attempt next. So before we attempt it, I just want to point to what we will do after solving this problem. See this guy here. Of course, we are able to obtain the solution at any time t, but it involves computing all this a and a square and so on. And if a is a general n by n matrix, a and a square are not, the entries of them are not, they don't look, at least superficially, related to one another, and therefore it is not possible for us to get as much of a handle over the solution as we would like. Okay, we will be restricted to having to compute all these all these powers of a and so on, and then obtain the solution to this, obtain the value of the state at some time t. Okay, so can we breathe more life, more intuition and transparency into the form of this particular expression e to the power at? That's what we will look at after we are done taking down this problem. Okay, so to solve this particular problem with some initial state x naught, there's a very clever trick. Okay, it's not only is a trick non-obvious, but I mean, it's also it exploits very well the first order nature of this differential equation. Okay, let me do that now. Okay, so we write x dot minus ax as b times u. Okay, now I multiply e to the power minus at on both left hand side and right hand side. This is the counterintuitive step. This is the kind of step that will probably occur to a mathematician. Okay, someone who has built up enough intuition about differential equations to guess the form, the way that the route that one must take to solve them. Okay, so e to the power minus at x dot minus e to the power minus at times ax, okay, is equal to e to the power minus at bu. Okay, now it turns out, so this is where again the cleverness of the person who proposed this shines through. It turns out that this complicated looking expression is actually the derivative of this particular function, e to the power minus at times x. That is, the derivative of this is just equal to this. We can check that. Okay, and that's equal to e to the power minus at pu. So is this really true? We can apply chain rule and check. So d by dt of e to the power minus at x is e to the power minus at dx by dt, which is x dot, plus d by dt of e power minus at x. Okay, and d by dt of e power minus at is given here. Okay, if I remove a to the left, sorry, to the right instead of to the left, as I did here, then I will get this to be simply equal to e to the power minus at times x dot plus e power minus at times a times x. Okay, which is exactly what we have here. No, I'm sorry, minus a times x, because there's a minus at here. Okay, which is exactly what we have on the left hand side here. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, I'm happy to see that you are following these steps. This is equal to e power minus at bu of t. Okay, so we would therefore have that e to the power minus at, so integrating both sides. So we have, I'll write down that expression again, times x is equal to e power minus at bu. Okay, so e power minus at x d of this is equal to e power minus at bu dt, and integrating this from t equal to 0 to some time t, in which case I should change these variables. I'll call this d tau. Okay, this is a variable of integration, d tau, up to some time t. Then I would get e to the power minus at x minus e to the power minus a times 0 times x naught is equal to integral 0 to t e power minus a tau b u of tau t tau. Okay, this I cannot simplify any further because I need to know the form of u of tau. I need to know how my input is changing with time for me to obtain a closed form expression for this. But that is a fairly straightforward integration that I can do if I am given u of tau. Okay, so therefore I would have that e to the power minus at x of t is equal to e to the power minus a times 0 is just identity matrix x naught. Okay, plus integral 0 to t e to the power minus a tau b u of tau d tau. Okay, or in other words, x of t is equal to, if I multiply everything with e to the power plus at, then I would have e to the power minus at times e to the power plus at to be equal to the identity matrix on the right hand side. On the left hand side, this will be capital plus at x naught. Okay, plus e to the power at times integral 0 to t e to the power minus a tau b u of tau d tau. Okay, what is often done is, since we have t here, it can be taken into the integral. Okay, and we can write this as e to the power at x naught plus integral 0 to t e to the power at e to the power minus a tau b u of tau d tau, and this e to the power at times e to the power minus a tau is e to the power a times t minus tau. Okay. So in general, you see, I need to caution you, this is a matrix, that is a matrix. Okay. I can add these exponents if these are matrices, only if those matrices commute. Okay. Otherwise, I cannot write this equation. So e to the times e to the power bt is not equal to e to the power a plus b times t. If a and b are scalars, of course that is true. But if a and b are matrices, in general this is not true. Okay, it's only if a and b commute, or in other words, ab is equal to ba. Only then is this substitution, the simplification possible. In this case, t is a scalar, tau is also a scalar. So this is just a matrix A. That's also another matrix. So at and a tau are just two matrices which are just proportional to one another, and therefore they commute. And therefore I can write it in this particular form: b of tau d tau integral 0 to t plus e to the power at x naught, that's equal to x of t. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so I see that you have followed the algebra. Firstly, notice that the initial condition term, the solution to the autonomous systems, the autonomous solution is already represented here. So if I had no forcing, in other words, if my u of tau was equal to 0, this entire integral will vanish, and I will be left with this solution, which is exactly what I obtained a few minutes back by considering only the autonomous system. Okay, by inspection and guesswork, I postulated that this might be, I hypothesized that this might be a solution, and confirmed that indeed it is a solution. And because we are dealing with a linear system, if this is a solution and it satisfies its initial conditions, then this is the only solution possible. Okay, so it's also unique. So this is a solution to the homogeneous differential equation or the autonomous system. And if I have some forcing input, then this is the extra term that changes the state as function of time depending on how the input u changes as function of time. I have to just compute this integral to get how x evolves as function of time in the presence of any arbitrary input u. So just look at the generality of this result. Okay, any input you give me, I just need to plug it in here and solve this integral. Rushikesh has a question.
Sir, how did you take that e to the power 80 term in?
Pardon me? Hello?
Hello? Has, sir, that e to the power 80 term you got into inside the integral. I did not understand that.
Why? What is preventing me from bringing it into the integral? This is not a function of tau, right? So if I had a factor 2 here, let us say, instead of e to the power 80, I could have brought it into the integral without any issue, because that factor 2 is not dependent on tau, right? It will not affect the value of the overall integral in any way. So this is just a constant in some sense. Okay, that's how I could bring it into the integral. It will not affect the value of the integral.
Okay, sir.
Okay, because what I'm integrating over is this variable tau. So if something is a function of tau, then that will affect the value of this integral. But this is not a function of tau. This is a function of t. Okay, so it in without affecting the value of this overall term, this product of e to the power 80 times that integral. Okay, so we have therefore reached the end of the road as far as our quest for solving this differential equation is concerned. Okay, so we started out with this equation f of x comma u. This is the general equation that captures the dynamics of practically any multi-body system that you can think of. And we discovered that in general, solving this in closed form is not possible. But there are two cases where a closed form solution exists. One is a trivial case where x corresponds to an equilibrium point. So there the input is 0, and x dot will be 0. So if I leave the states at that particular point, they will stay on at that particular location for all future time. Then there was this other case where if I were to look at states in the vicinity of this equilibrium point, I could ignore the higher order terms in the Taylor series expansion and focus on and approximate the dynamics of this original nonlinear system by linear dynamics. So this equation x dot is equal to ax here is a linear differential equation. Okay, even if you have this, it's a linear non-homogeneous differential equation. X dot is equal to ax plus bu, because A is a constant matrix, which is not a function of the states x. Okay, neither is B a function of either the states x or the input u. So therefore, this is a linear time invariant system. And for this kind of a system, I could solve the differential equation and obtain the solution in closed form. Okay. It turns out that this is about as far as we can go for this general f. We cannot do much more to obtain the closed form solution than what we have done here. So if you have to do much more, then you have to know the specific structure of f. And if you are lucky, that specific structure of f will allow you to obtain a closed form solution by using some of the clever techniques that might already exist in the. Okay, otherwise, this is about as far as we can go. Okay, why are we doing this? Because we have now sort of changed tack. We are done with our modeling efforts. The first half of this course was devoted to modeling of systems. Okay, we modeled a single rigid body, a collection of rigid bodies, etc., etc., and finally included springs and dampers and all of that. Okay, now we want to do direct dynamics. We want to understand how this system responds to different inputs, to different torques and forces that might impact them. Okay, why do we want to do this? Because our goal is to get the system to behave the way we want it to behave. Okay, the first step to being able to achieve that goal of getting the system to do your bidding, understand how the system responds to different inputs. And it is too bad that we cannot do it for the general case, but at least for some special cases, it is possible. Okay, so we are moving away from modeling and towards control in this process of obtaining the solution to this differential equations. Okay, so with that, I shall return to this term e to the power at, which started out being a very abstract looking term, but then it had a particular easily understandable embodiment. So it was just I plus at plus a square t square by 2 factorial, etc., etc. Okay, now even this, you might argue, is hopelessly complicated from the point of view of intuitiveness. Of course, I know that there is this dependence which I can use to extract the solution at any time t. So I'm not throwing away this on account of the difficulties in computing a and a square, a cube, and so on. But still, as an engineer, I crave further simplicity in appearance of this particular expression e to the power at. Can it be made to look even more simple than what it looks like right now? Okay, so that is what I'm embarking on at the moment. Okay, so towards this end, our efforts at diagonalizing matrices will actually come in very handy. Okay, so let me assume here that the matrix A can be diagonalized, and its eigenvalues are distinct. Well, if the eigenvalues are not distinct, it may be possible to diagonalize the matrix or may not. Okay, if they are not distinct, if it is not possible to diagonalize it, then it can be reduced into a special form called as a Jordan form. Okay, but if the eigenvalues are distinct, then it's always possible to diagonalize this matrix. By the way, we have come across diagonalization of matrices in the context of the inertia matrix, and there are substantial differences between the inertia matrix and this A matrix. The inertia matrix was a symmetric matrix, and if you looked at the structure of the A matrix for some of the problems that we solved in today's class, for the case of the pendulum and so on, let me just try to pull up that sheet once again. Yeah, see, this was the A matrix, right? You see that it is neither diagonal nor anti-diagonal nor skew symmetric. It has no particular well-defined structure to it. Okay, so you cannot therefore, as tempting as it might be, you cannot borrow many of the properties that were associated with inertia matrices to solve the particular problem that we are confronted with. This is a general matrix A. I'm assuming that for the sake of simplicity, I'm assuming that it can be diagonalized, and that it, or maybe I'm just assuming that eigenvalues are distinct. That automatically means that it can be diagonalized. Okay. So now you might stop me and say, okay, Jayant, fine. You are claiming that you will be able to give us a simpler expression for e power at if it can be diagonalized. What about the situation when it cannot be diagonalized? As I said, it is still possible to obtain an expression for e power at, which is less difficult to comprehend than this particular one. But in nature, we are trying to, as I said, we are moving towards control. And one of the basic reasons why we adopt control is because we have uncertainty about our system. Okay, so which means that even the CA matrix of our system may have some uncertainty associated with it. Okay, so if the entries of the A matrix are not known 100% accurately, then it is possible that if you incorporate a slight uncertainty in the entries of that matrix A, so it's possible that for those values of uncertain parameters, the eigenvalues of the matrix A will not be repeating. Okay, so for one particular set of entries of the matrix A, it's possible that the eigenvalues repeat, and you might not be able to diagonalize such a matrix. But when we are doing control, we have to always keep in mind the fact that our model of the system is always approximate. So that set of parameters for which A gets diagonalized, A does not get diagonalized, may not really be the actual parameters of the system at this instant of time. There may be some uncertainty associated with it. So therefore, in general, we don't need to worry too much. As control engineers, we don't need to worry too much if we are given a matrix A whose eigenvalues repeat and which cannot be diagonalized. Okay, it's a major headache to mathematicians, but not to us engineers, because it is highly unlikely that we come across a system with no uncertainty and with a matrix that cannot be diagonalized. So that's a very special case. Even that case has been addressed by mathematicians. In the interest of time and in the interest of conveying the essentials, I shall not discuss that particular case here. I'm just mentioning now that you can reduce A to a Jordan form and you can still obtain e to the power at for that case. We're not going to do that because it's an extravagant investment of energy into a problem that is seldom encountered in the controls, in our attempt to control a system. Okay, so how do we obtain a simpler appreciation of e to the power at when A can be diagonalized? So let us go through the diagonalization procedure once again. So if U1 is the eigenvector corresponding to the eigenvalue lambda1, then AU1 will be equal to lambda1 U1, AU2 will be equal to lambda2 U2, etc., etc. So a n by n matrix has n eigenvalues, and AUN will be equal to lambda n UN. Okay. Now we can go about diagonalizing exactly as we did for the inertia matrix. I can write the inertia matrix was simply a 3 by 3 matrix. Here this is a n by n matrix, so there are n eigenvalues and eigenvectors. So I can write this as A times U1, U2. I can just juxtapose all these eigenvectors all the way up to UN is equal to U1, U2, UN times this diagonal matrix lambda1, lambda2 all the way to lambda n. So this step here is identical to the one that we carried out for diagonalizing the inertia matrix. Okay. Now I call this matrix obtained by juxtaposing all these eigenvectors as capital U. Okay. In which case I would have that AU will be equal to U times this diagonal matrix lambda. Okay. Where lambda has only diagonal elements, lambda1, lambda2, all the way to lambda n. Okay. So what we would therefore get is that A is equal to U lambda U inverse. Okay. So what we did in the when we were diagonalizing the inertia matrix was to take this to the other side. We wrote lambda as U inverse AU. That was the kind of equation that we used to diagonalize the inertia matrix. Here we're just representing the A matrix in terms of a diagonal matrix by using these two matrices. Okay, U and U inverse. Any questions about this? Okay. Now we notice that e to the power at has powers of a square, a cube, and so on and so forth. Right? We have to compute them, and we find it a very it's just brute algebra. We cannot predict how a square will look like if I'm given a. Intuitively, it's difficult to imagine how it would look like, or a cube or a power n more generally. Okay, but this gives us very nice way to imagine a square. Okay, or a cube or any power of a. So what is a square? It is u lambda u inverse the square, which would be simply the product of this matrix times with itself. Okay, and this therefore you see that you have u inverse in the middle, and that when multiplied gives me identity matrix I, and therefore I would have this to be equal to u times lambda, which is lambda square u inverse. So this is a very nice thing, but it gets nicer as we go further. We have lambda square, so you have these padding matrices. Something is padding the lambda square on the left, and something is padding it on the right. So like this, any general power of a can, with a similar method of induction, be shown that would be of the kind u lambda power n u inverse. Okay, so that's a nice thing. Okay, I just need to compute now. These diagonal matrices raised to the power 2, raised to the power 3, and so on and so forth, and then pad that matrix up on the left hand side and right hand side by these two matrices u and u inverse. Okay, now what is lambda power 2? What is the structure for this matrix? It is just this lambda 1 whatever up to lambda n multiplied with itself, lambda 1 all the way to lambda n. Now do you agree with me that this is nothing but lambda 1 square, lambda 2 square, all the way up to lambda n square? It's another diagonal matrix with the diagonal entries being the squares of the diagonal elements of the original matrix. That's it. Okay, so this matrix is a very simple form and is very easy to, and its structure is very easy to visualize. Okay, and in general, lambda power n is simply going to be equal to this capital lambda power n will be equal to lambda 1 power n, lambda 2 power n, etc., all the way up to lambda n power n, and the other elements will be all 0. So this has a very simple form. Okay, so a power n therefore is simply u times this lambda power n times u inverse. Now we are in a position to breathe more life and more intuition into the expression e to the power at. So what is e power at? It is I plus at plus a square t square by 2 factorial, etc. Okay, and I can write I as u inverse, or yeah, correct, and at as u lambda u inverse times t, and a square t as lambda square u inverse times t square by 2 factorial, etc. Okay, now I take u out on the left hand side and u inverse out from the right hand side, and I would get e to the power at to be equal to u times I plus lambda t plus lambda square t square by 2 factorial, etc. times u inverse. Any questions about this? Okay, so this is u e to the power lambda t u inverse. Okay, now e to the power lambda t is a very different animal compared to e to the power at, right? Because e to the power lambda t is one whose structure I can easily imagine. just as lambda power n was simply the nth, each of these elements, the diagonal entries raised to the power n, okay, I can show very effortlessly that e to the power lambda t by definition is going to be I plus lambda t, etc., is nothing but each of these particular entries, lambda 1, lambda 2, raised to the power, e to the power lambda 1 of t would be the first entry of this matrix, e to the power lambda 2 of t, lambda 2t is the second entry, and so on and so forth. And the last entry will be e to the power lambda n t, and all other off diagonal entries will be 0. Any questions about this? Okay, so now we have a very neat representation for e to the power at. It's just going to be u times e to the power lambda 1t, whatever, e to the power lambda nt, a diagonal matrix times u inverse, and where u and u inverse are two constant matrices, and they happen to be, they comprise their columns are the eigenvectors of the matrix A, right? So therefore the solution e to the power at x naught, therefore if I look at the first term of that and the second term of that, so this will be a vector, right? X of t, this will be a n by 1 vector, right? If I look at the first entry, that will be some linear combination of these exponential functions. These are all scalar terms. I don't need to scratch my head about what these mean. This is something that I understand very well. So the first term x1 of t will be some linear combination of e power lambda 1t, e power lambda 2t, all the way up to e power lambda nt. Likewise the second one and the third one, and so on and so forth. So all the entries of the x vector will be linear combinations of these terms, e power lambda 1t, lambda 2t, and so on and so forth. So these terms are also therefore called as the modes of response. Okay. So what are these lambda 1 to lambda n? What are these numbers? These are the eigenvalues of the matrix A. How do we obtain eigenvalues of a matrix? So we solve this particular algebraic equation, and I'm sure you have come across this in the past. So if by definition AU is equal to lambda u, so A minus lambda I times u has to be equal to 0. So what this means is that if u is not a 0 vector, then this should not be a full rank matrix. So A minus lambda I should not be a full rank matrix. And that in turn implies that its determinant has to be equal to 0. So determinant of A minus lambda I equal to 0 has to be satisfied by any lambda that satisfies this other particular equation. Okay. So this equation, I'm sure you have come across this in other contexts, maybe in some linear algebra course that you would have taken in your undergrad, or maybe even here in IISc. This is called as the characteristic equation. It is in general a polynomial in lambda, okay, and the degree of the polynomial is n. So if A is a n by n matrix, then determinant of A minus lambda I equal to 0 will give me a equation of the kind lambda power n plus some constant A1 times lambda power n minus 1, etc., plus an is equal to 0. Okay, and there are n roots to this equation, and those roots, lambda 1 all the way to lambda n, are the eigenvalues of our A matrix. Okay, roots of the characteristic equation. Okay, so we noticed that any one of the entries of this x vector, okay, if I were to take x as x1, x2, all the way to xn, every one of them can be written. Let me take x1 alone for the sake of illustration. It can be written as some linear combination of these terms, these modes, right? It can be written as Ci e to the power lambda it, where I goes from 1 to n. Okay. The numerical value of lambda therefore has a fundamental effect on how the solution evolves as function of time. Okay, this was one qualitative information that I craved and I sought when I was staring at the original nonlinear differential equation. What do these solutions do? Do they die down with time if I release this even an autonomous system from a certain initial condition? Do they die down with time? Do they oscillate? Do they or do they increase as function of time? That information was not available to me directly. If I simply resorted to a numerical solution to this equation, because numerical solutions suffered from problems of lack of generality. It was true for that particular set of initial conditions, but we couldn't say for sure how things might behave for another set of initial conditions. But here, I know that given any set of initial conditions, in general, each of the entries of my x vector will be linear combinations of these modes. Okay. And the way the solution evolves with time, therefore, is completely in the hands of this particular term, lambda I. Okay. So we shall take a look at how the solution changes its appearance. Okay, depending on where or what the value of lambda I is. Okay, lambda I is in general a complex number. Okay, because if I have a polynomial in lambda equal to 0, the roots are in general complex. Okay, and since the coefficients of this polynomial are all real, if they are complex, you also have complex conjugate pairs being, you'll have their conjugate pairs also being the roots of this particular equation. Okay, so the character of the solution is completely in the hands of lambda I, any of these lambda I. So let us take one particular scenario. Okay, let us say all of these lambda I's are real numbers and their values are less than 0. So I will mark out along the negative real axis of the complex plane. So this is real part of lambda, this is imaginary part of lambda. Okay, I will mark out lambda 1 here, lambda 2 here. Of course, they need not be in this nice sequence standing one behind another. So maybe lambda 3 can be here, lambda 4 can be there, whatever. Okay, but the point is that they are all real numbers with their magnitudes less than 0. Okay, with their values less than 0. Then what will these terms be? E to the power lambda 1t over lambda 2t. How will they behave as function of time? Do you agree with me that they will all start with at t equal to 0, each of them has a value 1. But as time t tends to infinity, they'll all faithfully and go down to 0. The rates at which they go down to 0 are captured by these coefficients lambda I. Okay, if the lambda is smaller, in other words, these are closer to the imaginary axis, then the rate at which they go down to 0 is slower. Okay, the larger the lambda I is, the faster it is that I will decay to 0. Okay, so if all the lambdas are 0 and I release my system from a certain state, we know that they will all sheepishly go back to the origin, without oscillations, given enough time. Okay, then there is a possibility that lambdas are the real parts are negative, but they also have an imaginary component. For example, lambda 1 could be here, okay, in the complex plane. This imaginary part of lambda, this real part of lambda. Okay, if I have lambda 1 there, I'll also of course have maybe its complex conjugate being one of the roots of my characteristic equations. Lambda 1 bar will also be a root. How will the system evolve when I have this? So e to the power lambda 1t will be there, and I'll e to the power lambda 1 bar also be there as part of my solution, and the corresponding coefficients will also be complex conjugates of one another. Okay, so I will have a solution of this kind as part of my response. So if I have this, then if I expand it out, if I write down lambda as in its real part and imaginary part, I can show that there is going to be an oscillatory component that is associated with the whose frequency is associated with the magnitude of this imaginary part of lambda, and there's going to be this exponential decay which will be associated with the real part of lambda. So the response of my system will look oscillatory in nature and will decay as function of time. Okay, so this is what happens when lambda is at these locations in the complex plane. Okay, next, so you see therefore that the kind of response you get is completely different compared to how it was when lambdas were all real. So these lambdas therefore are very important pieces of information about the system, the dynamic system that I am dealing with, because they contain information about how the system responds, not just to initial conditions, but also to inputs, as we will see sometime later. Okay, let us take some other possible locations of this number lambda in the complex plane. So real part of lambda, imaginary part of lambda. Now let us say my lambda is exactly on the imaginary axis. Okay, then I will have something like e to the power j times, or maybe e to the power I, because j is often used by electrical engineers. I is the more commonly accepted symbol for square root of -1. So I magnitude of lambda 1, I'll have something like this, and I'll have a term like e to the power -I magnitude of lambda 1. And Euler has shown us that e to the power I theta is equal to cos theta plus j sin lambda 1 t, right? J sin theta, right? So when I add terms of this kind, I will have purely oscillating terms. There will be no exponential decay if the lambdas are all on the imaginary axis. Okay, so then I will have purely oscillatory response as function of time associated with just those modes alone. Okay, the other modes, if they are less than 0, then they will decay. But the component of solution which is associated with this mode, however, will persist. It will not die out. Okay. Then the next possible position for this root of our characteristic equation, maybe let us take a real value greater than 0. This is lambda 1. Okay, then what is e to the power lambda 1 t? As time t tends to infinity, as time grows, the solution also grows with time. Okay, so this is t, this is e power lambda 1 t. It starts at 1 and it grows like that. Okay, then suppose the last case when lambda 1 has an imaginary part as well as a real part, and the real part is greater than 0. Then just as there were oscillations that were decaying down in the previous case, here you will have oscillations that will be growing exponentially as function of time. Okay, so e power lambda 1 t will look something like, not exactly e power lambda 1 t, because e power lambda 1 t will be a complex number, but there will be its complex conjugate also. When you add the two up, you get a real response which is going to increase, whose amplitude is going to increase exponentially with time. Okay, so such a system, if I am stuck, if I've had the misfortune to be dealing with a system where one or more of its lambdas have the real parts greater than 0, I'm in real trouble. Okay, I'm having systems whose solutions grow exponentially with time. Okay, such systems are called unstable systems for obvious reasons. Okay, it need not be that every single lambda should be greater than 0, or the real parts of every single lambda should be greater than 0. That is not the definition for an unstable system. Any one of the lambdas, any one of real parts of lambda I greater than 0 is enough to qualify the system as an unstable system, because these terms will appear in one or another of the terms in X, and those terms will blow up as time progresses, and therefore that system will be the system solution will grow unbounded as function of time. Okay, if all of the lambdas, every single one of them, lambda 1 to lambda n, are all less than 0, the real parts are less than 0, then such a system is called as a stable system. for again obvious reasons. If I release it from some initial condition, it will faithfully and meekly come back to 0. It will do nothing fancy. Okay. So where was that piece of paper that on which I wrote just some time back? Yes, here it is. So both this kind as well as that kind, they're both stable responses. Okay, so these are stable systems. Okay, if one or more of the zeros of the characteristic equation are imaginary, so they have no real parts, they're either the real parts are 0, then such systems are called marginally stable systems. So the position of the roots of the characteristic equation in the complex plane have a profound impact of the differential equation evolve with time. They could either die down monotonically or die down in an oscillatory manner, or increase exponentially monotonically, or increase in an oscillatory manner, or just oscillate endlessly with a certain amplitude. Okay, and that character is decided by the real part of these eigenvalues, and we have therefore come up with a way to classify systems based on the real part of these eigenvalues. If all the real parts are less than 0, then all the solutions will happily die down as function of time, and such a system is a stable system. If even one of them is greater than 0, then that component alone will grow unbounded, and that component will inevitably appear in one of the expressions for x of t, and therefore the system solution will also grow unbounded. And that's an unstable system. And as I said, when the solution neither grows nor falls down, it's a marginally stable system. Okay, we'll take physical example of a pendulum and show that around theta equal to 0, the system is marginally stable, and around theta equal to pi, it is unstable. We'll do that in the next class. Okay, any questions so far? Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. Sir, these solutions we got just by neglecting the input now. Means the input is 0 in this solution.
Correct. Correct.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
That's what I want to confirm. Okay, sir.
The input is 0, and even if we will discuss the case as time progresses, we will bring in the input. In fact, right now we are looking at a toy problem, which is of not much use to engineers, because as engineers, we want to be able to control something. And if you have to control something, you want to be able to apply these inputs. Okay. So this analysis is just for the sake of classifying a system as either being stable or unstable. As time progresses, we will bring in the input and see how that can be put to use, how we can stabilize a system which is naturally unstable, or improve the stability of a system that is already stable, and so on and so forth. We will see that. So input will be brought in the next lecture.
Sir, one more thing. In the homework file, there was some questions regarding the multi-body system. So those seems very difficult. So if you practice some example questions for us, means for
which question was difficult? Can you tell me? Can you point out to me?
Yes, sir. So that question number 4 and 5. 4. Basically.
What is number 4? That double pendulum?
No, sir. The question before that manipulator.
The 3-link robotic manipulator.
A 3-link robotic manipulator, is it? So that's just a matter of applying your kinematic relationships and obtaining the this homogeneous transformation matrices properly. That's it. There isn't much more to it than that, and you can just use that forward recursion of angular velocity and angular acceleration and so on and linear acceleration and all of that to obtain the absolute velocities and absolute accelerations of all the different links. So as I said, conceptually it is straightforward. Okay, that forward recursion is what you would need to use. You just need to apply it carefully. That's it. Okay. What else was difficult?
Sir, Dinesh here, sir. Actually, sir, their links are sir, in 3D, sir. In class, sir, you have solved in plane only all the links are there. So that's why we are facing difficulty.
No, but the transformation matrix, homogeneous transformation matrix, captures the offsets between the origins properly, even for a three-dimensional manipulator. So if you looked at the exam problem, you know, where I had again given a three-dimensional manipulator, you have to only carefully obtain the transformation matrices from one joint to another, and then put them all together carefully. That's it. So beyond that, there is, in fact, the forward recursion that we derived in the class did not assume that the manipulator was planar. We did not assume that. So the equations that we derived in the class were valid even for three-dimensional manipulators. Okay, so you just need to use them. You just need to faithfully apply them. That's it.
And also, sir, please give some hint for the double pendulum question also.
The double pendulum is a planar problem. So you just need to assume that you have two reaction forces Fx, Fy, and a moment Mz at each joint. And then you have to draw a free body diagram for each of these things, and then obtain. So you have to use forward recursion once again to obtain the linear velocity of the centers of mass of each of these things in terms of the joint variables, and then also the angular velocity in the inertial coordinate system. It so happens that the z-axis of the second rigid body and the first rigid body are parallel to the z-axis of your inertial coordinate system because it's a planar problem. So the angular velocity expression will be fairly straightforward. It'll probably be just θ1 dot plus θ2 dot or some such thing. Okay, so you have to obtain, therefore, you have to use forward recursion to obtain the linear velocities of the centers of mass, and angular velocities of centers of mass, and angular accelerations and linear accelerations. You have to do it slowly. That's it. I mean, there is conceptually nothing very difficult about that. Then you have to use a free body diagram for every one of them. Assume Fx, Fy, and Mz as the three possible loads that can act on this pendulum, and then solve, come up with a differential equation connecting the accelerations to these loads and so on for both these rigid bodies. That's it. Okay, it's just tedious, but that was the whole point. The whole point was to show that if you want to eliminate those moments and joint reaction forces and so on, and come up with the overall differential equation for a 2R manipulator, it takes so much effort with Newton-Euler technique, whereas with Euler-Lagrange, in one step in the class itself, we did it without having to deal with all those internal forces and moments and so on. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And sir,
Yeah.
one more thing, that
Yes.
you have given another problem of heavy symmetric top. Sir, in that problem, we have calculated H naught B1, means angular momentum with respect to the B reference frame, B1 reference frame. So after that, we need to multiply, means omega cross that H naught B1. Sir, my confusion is that omega cross H naught B1 we are taking. Sir, omega cross, why we are taking only omega Z cross? Why we are not taking omega S plus omega Z cross? That's the confusion.
So this was a question that was also asked by another student some time back. Okay. So what you are looking for is the rate of change of angular momentum. Okay, that is being represented in the B1 frame. That's it. Okay. Now it happens that in the B1 frame, this H1, the angular momentum vector is a constant vector. It is not changing in direction. It is not changing in magnitude. Okay, but the B1 frame is rotating with respect to the A frame at a rate omega z, and that rotation contributes to a change in direction of the x component of the angular momentum vector. Okay, that is why, because there is a rate of change of angular momentum, and that rate of change of angular momentum is simply due to rotation of this angular momentum vector about the ZB1 axis. You have to only take omega z1 as the term for taking the cross product. You are only looking at finally rate of change of angular momentum. That's it. Okay. Already that. Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, but omega S, that is the spin speed, has also the component in the B1 frame now. So why we are not?
Spin speed has a component in the B1 frame, but the component is fixed. It is not changing with time. The spin speed, the angular velocity associated with omega spin, is oriented at an angle theta to the axis of your B1, to the z-axis of your B1 coordinate system. So the spin speed is constant, and the spin direction is fixed. Okay, and therefore, and since we are dealing with a symmetric top, the angular momentum will be along the direction of the spin itself. So the angular momentum associated with spin will be a fixed vector, okay, which will be aligned with the angular velocity vector omega s. Okay, so that will also be a fixed vector. So all the vectors, all the angular momentum vectors in the B1 frame are fixed vectors. Okay, you can solve this problem in the B frame also, by the way. That was the answer that I gave to the other student as well. If you solve the problem in the B frame, then you have omega s, full omega. Okay, not just omega z, but also omega s has to be represented. Okay, you can do that. And we also did that in the case of the free symmetric top. We solved that problem also in the B frame, and that involved, solving a differential equation, if you remember, and obtaining a solution to the differential equation. You can do that. Even here you can do that. There is no problem in adopting that approach. But this choice of the frame in which you resolve the components of moments and forces has been chosen very carefully. It has been chosen because in this particular frame, these moments and forces are constant vectors, which are not changing with time. Okay, so the change is only because this particular frame itself is rotating about the inertial frame at a rate omega z, and therefore the change has to be captured by doing omega z cross. Okay, so if you do it in this frame, you have to only do omega z cross. If you are doing it in the B frame, then you have to have omega being represented both in both omega z as well as omega s, have to figure in that expression for omega cross. Okay.
Sir, in that case, if we take in the B frame, then it would be like omega z plus omega s cross
correct,
H
correct.
not B, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, sir, I understood. Okay, so that means which frame is changing the angular velocity, that frame, rotation we have to take into account, right?
Correct. So
yes.
Yeah.
Sir, anything else are you saying?
No, nothing else. If you have any other questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll stop at this point.
Okay, sir. Okay,
so you wanted all questions, right? But you can email them to me and I can answer them. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.